Imagine a political shift, so total, so absolute, that in just a few decades, a decentralized, almost covert revolutionary movement completely transforms itself.
Right.
And it becomes one of the most sophisticated, powerful, and storied empires the world has ever known. We are looking at the intense political pressure cooker that was required to forge a golden age. This is the story of the foundation and zenith of the early Abbasid Caliphate.
And we aren't just relying on, the romanticized accounts. We are diving deep into the political steel of this era, and we're guided by Volume 3, Parts 3 and 4 of Ibn Khaldun's monumental historical work, the Tarikh.
A fantastic source.
Oh, it's incredible. These sources give us a really detailed and often quite brutal look at the period. It spans from the successful revolution in the 132 AH all the way through the calculated ruthlessness of al-Mansur, right up to that magnificent but, precarious peak under Harun al-Rashid, ending in 193 AH.
So our mission, really, is to trace the dynasty's life force. How did a group of rebels who owed everything to regional movements and these incredibly powerful generals, how did they manage to turn that fragile revolutionary victory into a structured, centralized imperial state?
And I think the darker question that goes with that,
Which is?
who paid the ultimate, often fatal price for that centralization? Because political consolidation it's rarely neat.
No.
It demands continuous purges, displays of absolute authority. We need to really get into the mechanisms of governance here. How did they consolidate power? How did they manage a contentious succession and handle threats from both outside, like the Byzantines, and inside, like the perpetually rebellious Alids?
And it seems like there's a core theme running through Ibn Khaldun's account.
There is. It's this deep inherent conflict. The caliph needed powerful, competent, and often indispensable allies. But, and this is the crucial part, the moment those allies became too powerful, they became existential threats to the sovereign's absolute authority.
The history is just populated by giants. I mean, you have Abu Muslim Khurasani, the revolutionary general. You have al-Mansur, the cunning, maybe paranoid, founder of the state apparatus.
And of course the Barmakids.
Right, the brilliant Persian viziers under Harun al-Rashid. All of them were figures whose genius contributed immensely to the empire's height, but their very success, in the end, made them liabilities. It's a chilling study in political calculus.
It really is.
It shows the extreme costs of absolute success in the early caliphate. We're going to unpack the surprising stability that fear, of all things, provided. Okay, let's start right at that revolutionary moment, the dawn of the Abbasids. When the caliphate begins in 132 AH, this is not a smooth handover.
Not at all.
It's a complete and total overturning of the Umayyad government. The sources really emphasize that the fuel for this revolution was just massive discontent, particularly centered in the eastern province of Khorasan.
Khorasan is absolutely the key word here. The Umayyad Caliphate, centered in Damascus, was increasingly seen as, an Arab aristocratic empire.
A bit exclusive.
Very. And Khorasan, way out to the east, was culturally Persian, it was geographically distant, and it was just fertile political ground for any anti-Damascus sentiment.
So the Abbasids saw an opportunity.
A huge one. They claimed a closer familial connection to the Prophet than the Umayyads, and they tapped into this deep well of resentment. So the first caliph, al-Safa, he immediately inherits this monumental task of turning a scattered, region-specific revolt into a legitimate, recognized, and unified government.
And the success of that whole project rested entirely on the revolutionary leaders who delivered the military victory.
Oh, of course.
Foremost among them, as the historian makes very clear, was Abu Muslim Khurasani.
Abu Muslim wasn't just a general. You could almost call him the revolutionary architect. He was the one who effectively organized the call and mobilized the masses in Khorasan under those black banners of the Abbasids.
So he's the one who delivers the caliphate.
He delivers it through sheer organizational and military command, which makes him utterly indispensable to the new regime. He was a local hero, commander of the most effective fighting force, and his power was rooted in the very heartland that supplied the Abbasid strength.
What's fascinating here, though, is that the period of revolutionary instability, it lasts for just a moment. Ibn Khaldun shows us how quickly the focus shifts.
It pivots immediately.
Once the Umayyads were gone, the greatest danger to the young Abbasid Caliphate wasn't the old regime anymore. It became the immensely powerful figures who had helped create the new one.
And this brings us directly to al-Mansur, al-Safa's successor, and the central defining conflict of his reign. The calculated and total purging of rivals, both external and internal.
Mansur was the pragmatic realist the dynasty needed.
Absolutely. He was faced with immediate, acute threats to his succession. The first thing we have to look at is the revolt of Abdullah bin Ali, who was al-Safa's uncle. The historian notes this rebellion happens right after al-Safa's death.
So it's an immediate challenge.
Immediate. And Abdullah was a former military commander. He was highly ambitious, and he was a very serious threat to Mansur's fragile claim to the throne.
And Mansur, right out of the gate, he demonstrates this political genius.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of committing his own, still developing central forces against his uncle, he strategically deploys the one man powerful enough to guarantee a victory.
Abu Muslim Khurasani.
Exactly.
It was a cynical masterstroke. I mean, think about it. Mansur was using one massive threat to neutralize another.
He's playing them off each other.
He is.
Huh?
He effectively gave Abu Muslim the ultimate test of loyalty go win against the caliph's uncle. But at the same time, he's forcing Abu Muslim to expend his own resources and, well, expose his own ambitions. And the sources note Abu Muslim achieves a decisive victory. He captures Abdullah bin Ali.
So the immediate problem is solved. But the deeper, more dangerous problem is now fully out in the open. Abu Muslim had just proven his strategic military genius, his unwavering loyalty, maybe to the Abbasid idea, if not to Mansur personally, and his ability to command these huge forces so far from the center of power. His political weight had gone from indispensable to intolerable.
That is the essential political tightrope the early caliphs had to walk. Mansur knew, as the chronicler implies, that there just couldn't be two supreme authorities in one empire.
There's only room for one.
Only one. The underlying tension is captured perfectly in that reported sentiment. I am the Emir al-Mu'minin, and he is the Emir al-Mu'minin. Abu Muslim Khurasani had accumulated so much loyalty and authority that he was functionally a co-sovereign in Khorasan. For Mansur, centralization was simply not possible while Abu Muslim was alive.
And this sets the stage for the pivotal event that defines al-Mansur's reign.
Yeah.
The calculated murder of Abu Muslim. The source details this with chilling precision. How did Mansur even manage to eliminate a man who was seen as a hero by the very army that brought the Abbasids to power?
He was patient, he was cunning, he was ruthless. He understood the psychological game.
He didn't just challenge him outright.
No. He played the role of the appreciative caliph, feigning contentment, trust, and repeatedly urging Abu Muslim to return to the capital, which at that time was still in Kufa.
And Abu Muslim's own people must have been wary.
Oh, they were. He received numerous warnings from his own camp, advising him not to trust the caliph. But, well, his own immense ego, and perhaps a fatal belief in his own indispensability, it led him to walk directly into Mansur's trap.
So he returns. And what happens next is just a brutal display of statecraft.
Once he's within the palace, Mansur has him cornered. He reportedly confronts Abu Muslim with old charges, escalating the argument until Abu Muslim finally realizes he's trapped.
It was all a setup.
A complete setup. At a signal, Mansur's guards rush in and kill the founding general of the Abbasid Caliphate. And the historian is really keen to point out this wasn't just a political execution, it was also an act of immediate state finance.
What do you mean? Mansur immediately seized Abu Muslim's immense wealth. He transferred vast sums of money and property directly to the central treasury. So this wasn't just about neutralizing a threat. It was about consolidating the financial resources of the state. It really underscores Mansur's known preoccupation with the state coffers.
That single act, the killing of the man who put him on the throne, it established a terrifying precedent for the entire dynasty. It said that absolute control supersedes any bond of loyalty, any gratitude, any past service. The caliph's sovereignty was the only non-negotiable principle.
And having established that political principle through blood, Mansur then needed to give the new dynasty a physical and immovable foundation. And this is where we see his decision around 145 AH to establish Baghdad as the new capital.
The founding of Baghdad, that was one of the most strategic decisions in early Islamic history. It was a clear physical statement that the Abbasids were breaking completely with the Umayyad past in Damascus.
And it positions the new center of power in Iraq.
Right, closer to the ancient Persian heartlands and, crucially, to the revolutionary base of Khorasan.
Exactly. It wasn't just a relocation. It was a total rebranding. Mansur envisioned and oversaw the construction of the famous Round City, an enclosed, defensible, symbolic center of global commerce and imperial administration. Ibn Khaldun highlights that this move symbolized the new regime's identity, a cosmopolitan, structured, centralized, and administratively robust state. It was completely unlike the sprawling, less structured capital of the Umayyads.
And Mansur's administrative style, it just mirrored his political ruthlessness. He was notorious for his cunning, his paranoia, which, was perhaps justifiable given the
He
revolution.
would say that.
And his fierce dedication to ensuring the state treasury was always full. He stabilized the new dynasty, but he did it through efficiency that was enforced by a very palpable fear.
And even with Abu Muslim gone and Baghdad founded, Mansur was constantly fighting for control. Centralization required suppressing all alternative forms of loyalty. We have to mention, for example, the suppression of the Rwandiya movement, which the historian records as another necessary step.
Who were the Rwandiya? That's a term that might not be familiar to everyone.
The Rwandiya were a quasi-religious group. They're often identified as extremist proto-Shia, and they held beliefs that bordered on seeing the caliph as a divine figure or an embodiment of God's spirit.
Which sounds like loyalty on the surface.
It does, but it was actually deeply dangerous because it created a political power base entirely outside the conventional military and administrative structures. They weren't loyal to the caliph's rule, they were loyal to his person in a mystical sense, which made them unpredictable and potentially volatile.
I see.
So crushing them was essential to assert that the caliphate was a political institution, not some cult of personality centered on an unmanageable religious doctrine.
So Mansur eliminated not just political rivals and two powerful generals, but also ideological and quasi-religious threats.
And that struggle was continuous, and it was on multiple fronts. The sources also mention the suppression of the Kharijite elements. Again, just for clarity, the Kharijites were a fiercely puritanical Islamic sect that historically destabilized regimes. They believed that only the most righteous individual, regardless of their family line, deserved to rule.
So they saw everyone as illegitimate.
Basically, yes. They saw both the Umayyads and the Abbasids as corrupt usurpers. So fighting the Kharijites, which is documented in the sources, it just highlighted the constant need for Mansur to exert military and ideological control across the entire burgeoning empire. His reign was a continuous war against any kind of political or religious fragmentation.
Al-Mansur's era was just defined by consolidation, achieved through necessary violence, fear, and financial discipline. So when his son Al-Mahdi assumes the caliphate, that's 158 AH to 169 AH, he inherits a state that is, stable, it's geographically defined by Baghdad, and it's financially sound.
Right.
Mansur built the political machine using fear and blood. The question now was whether his son could operate that machine using influence and legitimacy.
That's the perfect distinction. Al-Mahdi inherited a functional structure, but he also inherited the scars left by his father's harshness and the unresolved legitimacy issues. He represented a real shift in tone.
Oh, so?
Well, while Mansur was austere and focused purely on security and the treasury, Al-Mahdi initiated massive public works. He improved infrastructure, he promoted cultural and religious development. He was trying to move the dynasty from a revolutionary police state to a recognizable, magnificent empire.
But the shadow of illegitimacy never really left the Abbasids, did it? They had seized power, and they constantly had to justify their rule over the descendants of the Prophet's family, the Alids.
The Alid challenge is a theme that recurs throughout the entire early period, and Al-Mahdi had to spend considerable political capital addressing it. To clarify for our listener, the Alids were the descendants of Ali, the Prophet Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, and his daughter Fatima.
So they had a very direct claim.
A very direct claim. They felt, with considerable justification, that their family, based on their direct lineal connection to the Prophet, was the only legitimate source of religious and political authority. They viewed the Abbasids, who were only related by a more distant uncle of the Prophet, as just usurpers.
And the sources document the intensity of these revolts. I mean, they mention Muhammad and Ibrahim, who represented powerful resistance against Abbasid rule.
Al-Mahdi initially followed his father's repressive policy. He imprisoned several leading Alids, but later he tried to pivot towards reconciliation and incorporation.
A softer approach.
A much softer approach. He recognized that simply imprisoning them was just fueling the revolutionary fervor, so he released many, offered them stipends, and attempted to integrate them into the administrative elite. This approach, balancing repression with attempts at reconciliation, it shows Al-Mahdi trying to build legitimacy through softer means than Mansur's brute force, but it failed to extinguish the grievance entirely.
He also spent significant military resources on the external front, notably sending campaigns against the Byzantine Romans. He was setting a precedent that his successor would follow.
Yes, he was actively projecting Abbasid military strength outward while trying to mend these internal social wounds.
And that brings us to the brief but very disruptive tenure of Musa al-Hadi.
169 AH to 170 AH.
Just over a year. but politically explosive precisely because of this issue of succession.
Right. Al-Mahdi had designated al-Hadi as the heir, to be followed by the younger son, Harun al-Rashid. But al-Hadi, once he became caliph, tried desperately to overturn this arrangement. He wanted to sideline Harun and place his own young son as the next in line.
And this internal struggle,
Yeah.
it just confirmed that Mansur's efforts to centralize power hadn't secured a peaceful, institutionalized transfer of that power.
Not at all. The personal ambition of the caliph still trumped the stability of the dynastic plan. Al-Hadi's resistance to his father's will created this massive political atmosphere of instability. It forced Harun's supporters, including his powerful mother Al-Khayzaran and his influential tutors, the Barmakids, to maneuver defensively.
And then al-Hadi dies suddenly.
Very suddenly, often with historical speculation surrounding the circumstances. But when he died, the stage was perfectly set for the dramatic ascent of Harun al-Rashid and the rise of his allies.
Harun al-Rashid's accession in 170 AH, this marks the traditional start of the Abbasid Golden Age.
The famous era.
This is the time of cultural blossoming, vast wealth, sophisticated bureaucracy. It's the caliphate we often read about in popular history. But the political machinery underneath all that grandeur remained just as ruthless as it was under al-Mansur.
Absolutely. The defining feature of Harun's early reign was the phenomenal, almost unprecedented power wielded by a single non-royal family, the Barmakids.
The sources really focus on them.
Oh, they do. The accounts of Harun's accession dedicate significant narrative space to the rise of this Persian family, detailing their administrative genius and their political reach.
The Barmakids essentially became the indispensable operating system of the Abbasid state. Their patriarch, Yahya ibn Khalid, had been Harun's tutor, his Atabek.
Which established an incredibly deep bond of personal trust.
Exactly. So upon Harun's accession, Yahya was appointed vizier, a position of unparalleled administrative authority. He controlled the entire bureaucracy, taxation, military provisioning, everything.
And his sons only amplified that power. Jafar, the younger son, became a close personal companion to Harun, often described as being inseparable from the caliph. Meanwhile, the other son, Al-Fadl, was given charge of the eastern critical provinces, including Khorasan.
Khorasan again.
Always Khorasan. Remembering its centrality to military power, this was a massive delegation of trust and control. The Barmakids' political control extended across every single major department of state. They managed the mints, they appointed governors, they ran the vast network of spies and postal services that knitted the whole empire together.
The chronicler emphasizes their influence and their, well, lavish lifestyle. The descriptions in Ibn Khaldun detail their patronage, their architectural projects, their extraordinary wealth.
Right.
And this splendor contributed directly to the reputation of the era as a golden age, because they were responsible for funding the administration, promoting scholarship, and managing the treasury so effectively that the state could project this incredible wealth globally. They were brilliant.
They were, but their brilliance carried a political consequence.
But before we get to that, we have to recognize that this golden age required constant military defense. Harun al-Rashid was every bit the caliph of the sword as he was the caliph of the purse.
Oh, absolutely. This is evident in his aggressive foreign policy against the Byzantine Empire, the Rumi, or Romans, which were the primary external threat.
The sources detail Harun's personal involvement in military campaigns toward Constantinople. We see specific accounts of campaigns led against the Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus, who is referred to in the sources as Shaheen Khan. And Harun's forces achieved significant battlefield victories. They projected Abbasid power deep into Anatolia and forced the Byzantines onto the defensive.
And this really demonstrated the sheer organizational capacity the Abbasids had achieved. I mean, the Barmakids were supplying and funding these massive armies across vast distances. One of the most symbolic victories mentioned in the sources was when the Byzantine Empress Irene was forced to submit and agree to pay a yearly tribute to Baghdad.
A huge symbolic win.
Massive. And although conflict flared up again under Nicephorus, requiring more campaigning, the very fact that the caliphate could dictate terms to Constantinople solidified its status as the world's preeminent military power.
And internally, they continued the necessary political cleanup left over from previous reigns. They managed campaigns in places like Africa, which resulted in the establishment of the Aghlabid state.
The Aghlabid case is a really interesting example of pragmatic governance. Direct control over provinces as distant as Africa was just prohibitively expensive and inefficient.
Right.
So by establishing the Aghlabid state under a strong local governor, the caliphate maintained nominal suzerainty, they still prayed in Harun's name, while granting autonomy. This ensured the region remained productive and loyal without draining Baghdad's resources on distant Gariskas. This kind of balanced approach was a hallmark of the Barmakid era.
But even with all this success, the internal security, the administrative genius, the external victories, the perennial challenges persisted. The sources confirm ongoing battles against local Kharijite and Alid rebels.
Yeah.
It shows that the foundational struggles for legitimacy and control were never truly extinguished. They were just suppressed with Barmakid efficiency.
Which brings us to the political shockwave that defined the end of Harun's reign and sealed his own legacy of ruthless centralization. The sudden, stunning fall of the Barmakids in 187 AH. This event must have been absolutely terrifying for every single administrator in Baghdad.
It just shattered the illusion of stability and shared rule. The sources hint at a growing tension. Harun grew increasingly paranoid, or perhaps, realistically concerned about the Barmakids' excessive, pervasive power. Their influence was so immense, and their confidence arguably so arrogant, that they had begun to eclipse the caliph himself.
In the eyes of the public and the bureaucracy.
Exactly. Their success had become their political curse.
The problem was both structural and personal. Structurally, the caliphate's foundation, laid by Mansur, demanded a single absolute source of authority. Harun realized that in governing, he had become reliant on ministers who had basically created their own dynasty within his state.
And personally,
there was immense jealousy over their lavishness, their immense wealth, and perhaps even rumors regarding Jafar's personal closeness to the caliph in their private lives, which the sources sometimes allude to as a breach of court decorum.
regardless of the precise trigger the action taken was, it was swift, decisive, and brutal. The sources describe this sudden decree in 187 AH. Jafar bin Yahya was executed without warning. Some accounts say he was summarily beheaded.
And the whole family.
The entire family, Yahya, Al-Fald, all their associates, were arrested, imprisoned, and stripped of every scrap of wealth they possessed.
The scale of the purging demonstrates its political purpose. This was not a correction. It was a total annihilation of a competing power center. Harun was sending an unmistakable, loud message that echoed al-Mansur's earlier action. Absolute authority resides only with the caliph.
Indispensable until they weren't.
Exactly. Harun demonstrated that all power delegated could be instantly and brutally revoked the moment it impinged upon the caliph's sovereignty.
This act solidified the tragic flaw of the Abbasid political structure. Competence was necessary for the Golden Age, but ambition was fatal.
Yeah.
Despite this masterful reassertion of central authority, Harun himself, in his final years, planted the seeds for the next great crisis.
He did, the disintegration of that same central power.
We see this outlined in Harun's careful arrangements for succession. He tried to secure stability by dividing the empire between his sons. Al-Amin, the elder, was placed in charge of the west and designated the primary heir in Baghdad. Al-Mamun, the younger, was given control over the crucial eastern provinces, primarily, of course, Khorasan, and designated as the secondary heir.
He essentially institutionalized the very regional divide that his predecessors had fought so hard to unify. He formalized the split between the Arab-centric administration of Baghdad and the Persian-backed military power of Khorasan.
And that attempted stability just utterly failed.
Utterly. We know from the subsequent entries in Ibn Khaldun's work that this division immediately led to a devastating civil war after Harun's death, the Fourth Fitna.
And the conflict between the two brothers.
It fractured the central authority built so painstakingly by Mansur and Harun. It opened the door for regional autonomy and the long-term decline of caliphal power. It's the ultimate irony of Harun's reign. The man who destroyed the Barmakids to secure absolute power created the conditions for that power to collapse the moment he died.
So if we step back, the sources don't just give us a sequence of caliphs. They illustrate these deep, consistent political dynamics that ran through the entire foundational period. If you look beyond the names and the dates, you can sort of see the political DNA of the Abbasid state.
And the first and most enduring structure is the foundational power of Khorasan. This region was the source of the revolution, the heartland of the fighting force, and consistently the political key to the whole empire.
Khorasan was the engine room, wasn't it? Precisely because of its distance and its unique social composition. It was remote enough that revolutionary ideas could just ferment, and it provided a dedicated, organized, disciplined military base. The Khorasani troops that were fiercely loyal to their local commanders first, and the Abbasid cause second.
And that loyalty translated directly into leverage. Controlling Khorasan was synonymous with controlling the caliphate itself, Abu Muslim used this power to found the dynasty. Al-Fadl bin Yahya governed it during the Golden Age, which shows the immense trust Harun placed in the Barmakids. And crucially, Harun's final act was to place Al-Mamun there, ensuring that the next great power struggle would be fought between Baghdad and Khorasan. The dynasty could never escape its regional origins.
That structural reliance on Khorasan created this inescapable cycle of centralization and fragmentation. When the center was strong, like under Mansur and Harun, they could impose their will on Khorasan. But when the center weakened,
Khorasan became the source of independence and rival claims.
and that brings us to the second dynamic, which is foreshadowed later in the Chronicle. While our focus is on these strong central caliphs, Ibn Khaldun's later entries hint at the rapid decline in centralized power after the Civil War. We move from the caliph being the ultimate authority to periods where the caliphs become, well, effectively hostage figures.
That is a profound difference. Contrast al-Mansur, who physically built and controlled every aspect of Baghdad, who personally murdered his greatest general to seize his assets, with a later caliph who couldn't even leave his palace walls because regional military commanders like the Buwayhids and later the Seljuks controlled the army and the capital itself.
So the early Abbasids achieved this monumental centralization, but they failed to build institutions that could survive a weak caliph.
That's it exactly. Once the personal will of the sovereign faltered, the structure proved vulnerable to those military commanders, the emirs, who controlled the only real source of power, the troops. Fragmentation was, in a way, inevitable once the caliph's personal ruthlessness was gone.
And finally, that third dynamic, the most terrifying one. The nature of caliphal authority as defined by necessary murder. You can draw a straight line between the strategic, politically motivated executions of al-Mansur and Harun al-Rashid.
Mansur killed Abu Muslim in 137 AH to secure the state. The threat was revolutionary and military, a competing source of loyalty that challenged the very idea of a centralized caliphate. Mansur understood that for the state to exist, the army must answer only to him.
And then decades later, Harun al-Rashid destroys the Barmakids in 187 AH to reassert his personal authority. The threat here was different. It was administrative, economic, political, a non-royal family controlling the bureaucracy, the treasury, the cultural landscape.
In both cases, the indispensable founding general and the indispensable trusted minister, the caliphate's political consolidation demanded the elimination of powerful subordinates who had exceeded their delegated authority. The profound insight here isn't just that they were killed, it's that the Abbasids institutionalized a system where trust was lethal. They ensured absolute personal control by crippling their ability to delegate safely, and that established a fundamental weakness in the long-term governance of the empire.
The consistent theme, spanning 50 years of the dynasty's most powerful phase, is that stability and splendor were secured not by robust institutions or shared governance,
No.
but by preemptive surgical strikes against internal power aggregation. The caliph had to remain the single point of failure, and thus the single source of absolute control. Our deep dive into Ibn Khaldun's account, it really strips away the romance of the Abbasid Golden Age and reveals the complex, violent reality underneath. We journeyed from the bloody revolutionary establishment under al-Safa through the ruthless, paranoid centralization achieved by al-Mansur,
Who sacrificed his most effective general?
and finally to the zenith under Harun al-Rashid, whose final brutal act was the instant dismantling of the Barmakids. The early Abbasid era was defined by magnificent governance and extreme political paranoia.
What the sources make terrifyingly clear is that the splendor of this golden age was achieved at a very specific cost. It wasn't built merely on wealth, but on a terrifyingly effective system where loyalty was constantly tested and the cost of absolute power was perpetually due.
And that price.
That price was always payable in blood, whether it was the blood of the founding general Abu Muslim Khurasani or the trusted vizier Jafar the Barmakid. No level of success or competence was tolerated if it risked impinging upon the caliph's sovereignty.
It forces us to ask a crucial structural question about political history. The caliphate, to secure its throne, consistently devoured its most successful servants. So if indispensable ministers like the Barmakids who brought administrative order and wealth can be erased overnight simply because their perceived power threatened the sovereign, how do you sustain the level of genius and talent necessary for governing a vast empire?
How do you incentivize the best and brightest when success is a fatal liability?
It seems like the dynasty's tragedy was that it was structurally incapable of rewarding competence without generating a threat to the throne.
I think so. The caliphate only survived by constantly destroying its most competent allies, and in doing so, ensuring absolute personal rule at the cost of eliminating the very institutional administrative capacity that created the Golden Age in the first place. This inevitably led to a decline in the caliber of trusted subordinate talent.
So you have to wonder, looking at the whole arc of Abbasid history, was the constant political purging the reason that caliber eventually declined? Did it pave the way for the later hostage caliphs and the fragmentation that followed? That perhaps is the true political lesson of the Abbasid zenith.